Hello, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. Many of you remember a little while ago I posted a video about the Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, visiting Fort Knox on Eclipse Day. Well, we found out that there was someone else with him, very important, Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader. And it makes you wonder what was up with this visit and why post it on Twitter. You know, the U.S. government is not really known for bringing out the importance of gold. So there must be something behind it, which may be a bit more, because no one's visited the vaults from the civilian population since 1973, and much longer than that since the previous Secretary of the Treasury has ever visited Fort Knox. Now, it could be that Mr. Mnuchin is a fan of gold himself, and maybe it was a personal thing, he wanted to see it, but I don't know. Something tells me there may be a little bit more to it, and I thought that sort of at the time was kind of curious. And of course, many of you out there have posted your thoughts about this matter and said, well, you know, kind of half-heartedly laughing at the whole situation. It doesn't mean it's there just because he says it's there. And even if it was all there, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of debt we have in this country, and that's true. But I think there's more than meets the eye on this situation, and so it takes a little bit of looking back here. You know, the Federal Reserve on their own website here talks about how the statutory price of gold, which is set by law, it does not fluctuate with the market price. And since 1973, it's been $42.2222 9 times over cents per ounce. And so that's the book value that is in the Treasury, held by the Treasury, is determined using regulatory price. And for those who may not know, the Federal Reserve itself doesn't own any gold. The actual Federal Reserve Bank in New York acts as the custodian of gold owned by account holders such as the government, foreign governments, other central banks, and official international organizations. No individuals or private sector entities are permitted to store gold in the vault of the Federal Reserve Bank in New York or any Federal Reserve Bank. So the small portion of gold held by the U.S. Treasury, about 5%, is held in custody for the Treasury by the Federal Reserve Banks as fiscal agents of the United States. But nonetheless, the whole thing with Fort Knox and the like, you know, that's a Treasury installation. And so, but still very unusual for a Federal Reserve or for a U.S. Secretary of the Treasury to visit. But quite interesting indeed, and how this all plays out, and the fact that it's at $42.22. That's an important number because of this article that I saw, and actually after I read it and saw this video, other members of the community had sent me links on this and found it was quite interesting. And now keep in mind, this is Kitco News, and there's a lot of caveats here that Jim Rickards, who's being interviewed, says, and I don't believe that what is initially predicted will happen. It could happen, but even if it's used for even if what happens occurs here, I think that it will be quite an interesting move by the U.S. government. Let's listen and hear what he says about this particular situation, then I'll comment afterwards.
The Treasury has a trick up its sleeve. It's been done before, which is the following. The gold on the books of the Treasury is officially valued at $42.22 per ounce. Now, everyone knows that's not the price, but that was the price back in 1973 when they first did this. You could market to market just the way a hedge fund does. So the Treasury could take the gold and say, okay, we're now going to market to $1,300 or any number you want. And that difference between $42 an ounce and $1,300 an ounce, all the Treasury has to do is send a certificate. This is under the Gold Act of 1934. All they have to do is send a certificate to the Fed, and the Fed has to give them the money in the Treasury's bank account. So the Treasury could pull $350 billion out of thin air just by remarking the gold.
If that were to happen, what would that do to the price of gold?
Well, at a minimum, you would say, well, wait a second, the Treasury's treating gold like money. Maybe I better think about what it means to be money. The minute you do that, you get to $10,000 gold, because that would be That would be what the price of gold would have to be to support the existing money supply, basically M1.
So there you have it. It's quite an interesting scenario, and basically the precipice of this is there are that possibly Steve Mnuchin, who is working on a detailed tax plan to be submitted to Congress in September. And keep in mind that the budget ends at the end of September. October starts a new fiscal year here in the United States, and Congress wants to raise the debt ceiling. And Trump wants to spend $1 trillion at least for infrastructure, and so they want to raise the debt ceiling, but they're expecting a budget battle. You know, the problem is that the Congress has not been very helpful in working with Trump on, as you can have noticed, with healthcare and the like. And also, he's guessing, or probably the administration is guessing, that he's going to have a tough battle ahead of him with tax cuts, and it'll be watered down so much. And of course, the threat about the wall, that he would rather have a government shutdown than to, in order to get the wall passed, or the funding for the wall through. So unless there's a continuing resolution, this is the kind of trouble that could have in, and this would free up some cash so that the Treasury has it to spend on these things. And that alone, you know, spending in government is not always a bad thing, but it's mostly a bad thing because they overspend. And, you know, you talk about the $600 hammers, you know, that the Defense Department has, and it's still the case. It needs to be overhauled. The whole system does, for sure. And I think Trump is probably the one that's more likely to do something like that, but it's a long road. There's a lot of bureaucracy there, and it's going to take a long time, even if he has a full 8 years. Not one administration can do it. So money's got to be allocated, and this might be one way to do it. Now, what Jim Rickards says about the comparison to the M1 money supply, gold to the monetary base ratio, we can see that in 1980, when it spiked up here, you know, and that, you know, we could see that ratio and it come down here. You know, it's obvious, but I don't think that correlation is going to make account for much. And I don't think the general public will necessarily have a eureka moment with gold, and all of a sudden realize, well, hey, based off the M1 money supply, gold should be $10,000 an ounce. I just don't think that connection is going to happen. It could, but it's highly unlikely, even if they make such a bold move as to set the price by law of gold to $1,300 an ounce or what have you. So there you have it, an interesting turn of events. We shall see if there was any ties. It'll all come out and play out. Certainly by September, we'll kind of know what happens there. I think it's one of those things that it will make news as a blip in the radar, but if something else bigger comes along, mostly people won't care. But I think that investors will certainly be all the more bullish on gold, and I think it will raise the price of gold somewhat, but probably not as much, not even as half as much. But we shall see how it plays out. But stay tuned for another interesting, informative video on Fort Knox coming Saturday. Post your thoughts about this article and what you think about what Jim Rickards says and about other matters. And I'd like to extend the multitude of gratitude y'all for watching. Encourage you to please rate, comment, and subscribe.